was me. Um, but the college football playoff news was big enough and interesting enough that I thought we should put something out tonight. Um, the day the news comes out. So let's take a look at it. We got a whopping 0 people in here right now. It's big time. All right, so let's take a look at what actually came out today. They approved the 12-team playoff, so expansion from 4 to 12. This is pretty much what they wanted to approve over a year ago, I believe. They got struck down and has some feet being dragged by the mighty alliance that is no more. So we've got 12 teams, 12 team playoff, 6 conference champions. The 6 highest ranked conference champions will make it as automatic qualifiers. And then you have the 6 at-large qualifiers. So the highest ranked the 6 highest ranked conference champions, the 6 highest ranked non-conference champions. The top 4 conference champions will get buys, and they're looking at having first round games played on the campus of the higher seeded team. So what does this mean for group of 5 teams? Well, it means you have an automatic bid to the playoff now. At least the highest ranked one does. You have the possibility of getting more than one team in the playoff, which is, I think, pretty big. There have been some years in the past where you may have gotten 2 teams. I think recently, I'm not at a wedding. No, just at home. I have 3 children, so we don't get out much. Yes, you would have, I think 2020, you would have the possibility of Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina being in the playoff. Last year, obviously, Cincinnati would have qualified for a bye into the second round. And so how this changes things is, I don't know if it'll end up changing who becomes the champion, but obviously it changes access to the championship. And being in the American is a pretty good deal because I think the American would have had the highest ranked group of 5 champion in quite a few of the past 4 or 5 years. They would have had kind of the majority of that, as they've had the majority of those New Year's 6 G5 qualifiers. So that's you're in a pretty good spot if you're USF going forward, even without going into a new conference. You have the ability to make the playoff now once this goes through. So it's not coming down right now until 2026. So you have a little bit of time to kind of recruit to it. Eric, does this slow down the move to the Big 2? I think it does. I think this was passed as yeah. See, Nick's got the count here. The American's been pretty good. The American's by far the top group of 5 conference. So if you're the American champion, you've probably got a good shot of making this playoff going forward. Eric asks, does this slow the move to the Big 2? I think it does a little bit, because if you can qualify, if you can qualify for the playoff, I think a lot more schools will feel pretty good about where they're at. The question will be how the money gets dispersed, I think. And that's something that on the call today, the chairman, Bill Hancock, I believe his name was, he didn't really have a good answer exactly for that part of it. But I think that'll be big, how the money gets distributed, what networks the games air on. Right now, everything's on ESPN. I think that'll change going forward, and that's kind of part of the process why you had the Big 10, who's no longer affiliated with ESPN, really pushing for this now, whereas a year ago, or a little bit over a year ago, they were really into the idea. Well, now their television partners can benefit from it. So I think this could slow down that move to the Big 2 to get all the money, if this money gets distributed pretty evenly across the conferences, which I'm not sure exactly how that will happen. But you'd imagine that there'd be some type of money involved for qualifying for the tournament. So would be pretty interesting. I think the coolest part is we may get home playoff games, so at the home stadium. The only thing I'm not positive on that I'd like to get more clarification on is, are the conference champions seeded 1 through 6? I think that would be the right way to do it if you want to reward people for winning their conference, ensure that they get a home game even as a lower seed. I don't know if Notre Dame necessarily needs to move. They'll probably make if they have a good team, they'll make the top 12 every year. I think this could even slow down I think on the total, this move slows down the push for realignment, especially with the automatic qualifiers going to the top 6 conferences. You could get to a point where if too much realignment, if let's say the Big 12 goes in and takes over the rest of the Pac-12 and kind of kills it. Well, then now are they going to contract it to the top 5, or they leave it at 6? Well, if they leave it at 6, now 2 former G5 conferences would have automatic bids. So this is a little bit of a Band-Aid, I think, but it is an interesting proposal. Yeah, Notre Dame's always going to have Notre Dame's always going to have a ticket in if they're good enough. There's the tradition, the market, especially if NBC gets in on broadcasting playoff games, they'll always have an in with their tradition and kind of the size of their fan base and everything like that. I mean, they're athletic directors on the college football playoff board of managers, or I'm sorry, they're presidents on the board of managers that help make this decision. So you have one from every conference, and then Notre Dame's president singularly. BYU, who's also an independent at the time, right now, they've never had their president on. Now they're moving to the Big 12, obviously, but Notre Dame is special in the eyes of the college football decision makers. And so if they are in the top 12, or if they're good enough, they'll make the top 12, they'll make the playoff. The question is, I guess getting a bye, right? But maybe this is the price you'll have to pay if you're Notre Dame for not being in a conference, is not getting that bye. But that is where it kind of gets interesting, right? If the top 4 conference champions are the ones that are going to get the bye, well, what happens if Notre Dame's number 1 or number 2? Are you going to push them down to 7? Yeah, I don't know. So I would tend to agree with Nick that there will be some type of exception made for that, but who knows? Notre Dame agreed to it, I think, just knowing that if they will lose 1 or 2 games, but yeah, 2026 for the stadium and also for the ability to make the playoff. I mean, that'd be a good, if they do seed it 1 through 6 for the top 6 conference champions, then you're talking about possibly hosting a playoff game. Yeah, I don't know. This is where it gets weird, right? Do you give UConn an exception and Notre Dame gets an exception? I don't know. I wouldn't think that'll be an issue, but that is something they'll have to figure out exactly how they want to deal with independent teams. But to me, this slows the need for anyone to move if the money gets distributed in a good way. If it becomes where it's by team, and then you're the SEC or Big Ten still getting 4 teams into this playoff now, and the gap just grows and grows and grows. I'm not sure how you can stop people wanting to move and try to get more money that way, but I would imagine there's got to be some type of equitable split. Yeah, Michael Gill, he's ready. He in his brain, they're hosting a playoff game in 2026 at their new home stadium. That'd be pretty cool. But for USF, this is obviously good news, regardless of the conference situation, like we've already spoken about, and like Nick pointed out earlier. The American is the premier conference in terms of getting these G5 being like the 6th highest ranked conference champions. So if you win the American going forward, now that might change with teams leaving, but if you win the American going forward, you got to feel pretty good about making this playoff. So USF with those teams leaving, with the amount of talent that's on this team that's young, you'd hope they'd be by that time be ready to take that next step into a brand new stadium, hopefully, and into contending for a conference championship, which I think Jeff Scott promised the freshman students at their orientation. He came in and said, we're going to win the conference championship before you guys graduate. So that would be on the timeline. Uh, could be. Is this what Mike MK meant with dominoes falling? Could be. He's plugged in. If you don't know anything else about him, he's plugged in. He knows a lot of these people. He obviously served in a capacity with the college football playoff, so he kind of understands what's going on. I'm sure he was probably adamant for an expansion. I think all the G5 ads and commissioners were probably pretty adamant that expansion was needed. And I think, there's a little bit of a straw man right now in terms of, well, these games are just going to be blowouts. Alabama has to play the number 7 team in the country in the second round. They're just going to blow them out. Yeah, but there's blowouts now between 1 and 4. There's that. And then the second part of it is, I think this coupled with NIL, and that'll be something I think comes soon too, because there is already talk about if we're adding this many games where we're possibly playing 16 or 17 games, we got to go to some type of revenue sharing model with the players where the players get a cut of this extra money as well. If not, we're asking them to subject themselves to a lot more games, a lot more risk without not much more reward for them. But, that's kind of the rub there. If you want this expanded playoffs, that means they're going to have to play more games, which involves more risk. But what could happen, and I think might happen with playoff expansion and NIL legislation, hopefully getting nationalized or regulated somewhat, and this could be something that college football playoff has a regulatory body in terms of you have to meet these criteria in NIL. In terms to qualify, if you're out of compliance, you can't qualify for the playoff. Could easily do something like that to try to make some type of national NIL legislation. But with that, I think you're going to see the talent disperse a little bit. I think you'll see it. This is what was interesting to me about it not being until 2026. Well, just look at like the traditional big three. Can you see the finger quotes? The traditional big three in Florida, right? They're losing guys the past few years left and right to Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. Well, now, Florida would have, if it's a 12-team playoff, Florida would have made it 2 or 3 times the last few years. Obviously not last season, but they would have made it, I think they would have made it in Mullen's other years. So you can sell playoff to these guys. And same thing, Miami's been close, hovering around the top 10 before recently. They were to make the playoffs. Well, maybe do they keep some of those guys away from Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State? Do you keep I believe Jerry Judy's a Miami guy. Does he stay and go to Miami now? Well, now that makes Alabama worse, right? So does Alabama come back to the pack a little bit more if they're not able to go into Florida and take everybody they want? I think there is some kind of branching alternate realities kind of off of this that maybe those big time recruiters, maybe that big gap kind of shrinks and they come back to the pack a little bit, and maybe there's not as many blowouts. There probably still will be when you get if you get some smaller teams in there and against these really well-oiled machines. But I think there also could be where the talent equals out a little bit more and you have a lot more competitive playoffs than you have at 4. I don't think the NFL can do anything. They've gotten a free farm system basically for a long time. So I don't know what they want to do if they want to upset the apple cart. They'll just have to offer more money, right? Um, that's kind of what it'll be. And what the detriment to the NFL is that they've reduced rookie pay, I think, in the last 15 years or so, because the players union would rather have guys that have been playing for a while be able to make a little bit more money and kind of cap rookie pay and cap rookie bonuses. So the established players are making their money. And then once those guys that are rookies become established players, well, they can make their money and kind of that way. So there may be some guys that can make pretty good money. Now, this has probably been the case at some places like Alabama already. There are probably some guys that took pay cuts to go to the NFL. So I don't think the NFL is going to be able to do much of anything. If they step in, you might be cutting the legs out from underneath yourself when you're looking at basically a free farm system that gets guys ready to play in your league. So Any questions on this from anybody? I think we've been on here for 15 minutes. Just want to get on and talk real quick about the positive impact this can have on USF and college football as a whole. I think this can make I don't if it was instituted tomorrow and we start going out there and we're doing it, I don't think it changes really who becomes national champion or makes for more competitive games when the top two or three. There's a huge gap from the really elite in college football to everybody else in terms of recruiting and talent. And the only way that'll take time to change, it's just as it took time to kind of accrue. And I think how that could change is with this access now. Jeff Sky gets a kid in Tampa that maybe in the past would he wants to go play. He wants to have a chance to play for the playoffs, so maybe he goes to a Big Ten school or he goes to Iowa State. They've had a pretty good run, but now he can say, "Hey, if you come here, if we get enough of you guys to stay here, we're going to win our conference, and if we win our conference, we're going to make the playoff." Well, now you can pitch the same thing to recruits that Alabama and everybody else is pitching, which I think a lot of guys want to go win. That's the number one thing you see when you ask guys in recruiting. You see guys talk about rings. They want to be able to win championships. Well, if you can do that now and stay closer to home, and let's say you're USF and you get your NIL stuff in order, now you have the ability to make the playoff. Now maybe you get a couple more guys to stay home than you normally would, and then that makes your team stronger, right? Does this make USC and UCLA question going to the Big Ten? I don't know. I think they're still probably happy with it because they're going to make a ton of money. It might make the teams that are moving, USC, UCLA, the Oklahomas, and the Texases. Now this makes it a lot more difficult for them to make the playoff, probably. Because, if Oklahoma or Texas ends up fourth or fifth in the SEC, that's no guarantee of making the playoff there, right? But if it stayed at 4, there's obviously no guarantee of making the playoff then either. I'll be at the game. I'll be in the press box covering the game. Looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun. Hopefully we get good weather and we can see kind of these teams at their peaks here and see what USF is going to do. So I'm really excited to see all the changes out on the field for the first time since spring, and spring almost doesn't even matter because we have a brand new quarterback. So it'll be really interesting to see. Let's see where we go. Yeah, I think what I said earlier, right? The 2020, you very well could have gotten Cincinnati and Coastal, I believe in. They might have fudged those numbers on the back half to get Coastal out, right? So you could see more than I think this is basically we'll get one G5 team in almost every year. In some years we'll get 2, but I think you'll see kind of like we all thought may happen last year to Cincinnati, where if Oklahoma State wins that game, do they just push Cincinnati out and just be like, you know what? Sorry, you didn't quite make it. You didn't get the 4th. Well, now they might start doing that with 12 and 13, right? So you'll have one in automatically, which is nice. And then if my big, the most interesting thing to me about this is how long is this locked in for? Because this first contract was locked in for a while. I think it was a 12-year deal to do 4. But how long are they going to lock this next one? Because if this next one gets locked in for 12 years, and then all of a sudden the Pac-12 folds, well, now or 2 G5 leagues now get automatic qualifiers. Do we keep it at 6 automatic qualifiers? That would obviously make it a little more interesting. Or do we get a push to 16 when we need to make more money, so we need to have more games? We get a push to 16, and now every conference gets an automatic qualifier. That would make it even more interesting, in my opinion. So we will see what happens with that. I think it is interesting. Change my prediction. No, let's see. I'll try. I'm going to get on the field tomorrow before the game. Let's see if the BYU receivers are dressed out and warming up. And if not, I'll make sure to tweet it out and maybe change my prediction. I think if those guys don't play, USF covers. So maybe I'll try to get that out for you degenerate gamblers so you can jump on USF plus 12 before the news gets out. Any more questions? We've gone about 20 minutes now, which is about 15 longer than I anticipated being able to talk. So, any more questions before we get out of here on the playoff or tomorrow's game? I'll wait here for a minute because I know there's some lag. Yeah, I'll be the only one there, I believe, for Daily Stampede. So I may be in charge of the Twitter. So I'll try to tweet out some impressions um, from pregame, maybe in terms of we looking bigger, looking stronger, looking faster. Everybody's bigger, stronger, and faster at this point of the season, right? And then we'll see if those guys are playing for BYU, which would be a big loss for them. I think it really changes what they want to do on offense. So if those guys don't play, I think it gets a little tough, a lot tougher for BYU actually. So we will see. All right, thank you guys for jumping on and chatting with me here. I don't know if this is going to be turned into a podcast or not, if it'll just stay here, but I thought it was a big enough news that we needed to talk about it. And what's better than talking about college football? So I'll see you guys tomorrow from the press box at Ray J. And I'll be walking in probably 2 hours before the game. If you see me, yell at me and I'll come talk with you and say hi or whatever. But thanks for tuning in. Go Bulls.